All right, we're going to do something, and we're going to do something interactive to get started. I want you each to take a sticky. We're going to use a couple of these because I have my particular knowledge from my own experience, but I want to help gather your knowledge about what you know about the assets, the strengths of your particular religious tradition and your particular local faith community that you are a part of. So we're going to start off doing that first. Okay, does everybody, while you're getting your stickies, let me tell you what I want you to do with your first sticky. The first thing that I want you to do is to think about your particular religious tradition, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, whatever that however you define your broad religious tradition. And I want you to write down on your sticky what you think the particular strength of that religious tradition is. Okay? Perspective. Now I want you to think about your local faith community, wherever it is that you are, whatever it is that you're where you worship regularly. Okay? And I want you to think, and what I want you to do is to think about strengths of that. Now, in this particular question, I want one strength on one sticky. Okay? So we're going to take just a minute, and I want you to think about the strengths of. I am a member of North Park Covenant Church on the north side of Chicago. So if I were thinking about that, what would I say are the strengths of that particular congregation? Wherever it is that you worship, in synagogue, mosque, church, wherever, to identify strengths. And we're going to just take a couple minutes, what that strength is, and one strength on one sticky, okay? And we're not necessarily trying to get an exhaustive list. Because depending on your experience, you might have numerous things to contribute. But we just want to try and get a couple together. And then I'm going to give you a conceptual framework for looking at the strengths of congregations. Okay, we're going to. I'm going to give you a framework for, again, another piece from Gary Gunderson. He's not the only person he's certainly one of the more articulate people who's contributed to this area of the intersection between faith and public health. There certainly are other sources. There certainly are other sources as well. And it might be helpful as we're getting started, though, to just give you a little bit, to let you know what my own religious background is, because one of the important things and the wonderful opportunity about being in a situation like this is to be in a conversation with people from different traditions, but it's important to recognize where people are coming from. As much as I try to be inclusive in terms of my own language, there may be terms that I might use that you might use differently, or that you might use different terms in your own particular tradition, your own local faith community. And so I would invite you to be mindful of those, and when we have time for conversation, those might be things to share, because the language that we use will make a big difference in terms of engaging people. So certainly now my background is as a Christian, and I've worked with a number of different congregations. Before I was at North Park, I worked with congregations and synagogues all over the city of Chicago with a program at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. So that is my context. There's tremendous diversity within the Christian tradition. I am not tremendously familiar with Islam in terms of their community life, and so if I'm using so that's my background for where there are other religious perspectives that we can all bring together, that to be able to share that will be important. It will be important in our conversation. So we're all bringing our own background as we think about the strengths, and we're going to share those information that you've got on your stickies. Okay, now if you happen to have my handout, there were two different handouts. They're actually the same thing. So if you, this one, not the PowerPoint slides.
They're up
Okay, is the one that will have, for your reference, if you want to know where we're going with this. Okay, now in terms of telling you where, okay, in 1997, Gary Gunderson wrote this book, Deeply Woven Roots.
Is that the fake one?
Yeah. Okay.
Here we go.
Deeply Woven Roots, improving the quality of life in your community, and that's where his original concept of talking about the strengths of congregations came from. Now, he just recently has a book that came out with James Cochran called Religion and the Health of the Public. I've mentioned that at the end of your handout, and he's used where he has reiterated and updated this. He's using a new term in this book. He talks about faith-forming entities, which is a bit of a mouthful. I'm going to use the term congregations, meaning talking about local groups that are worshiping and connecting together. But in trying, so that is the source in terms of what we're talking about today. So he identifies 8 different strengths of congregations. Now, I want to suggest that this is one framework. It's an excellent framework. It's not the only way to understand this. So if you think of, we're going to have an opportunity when we finish to look at if there's anything you think that you might add in addition. The first strength that he talks about is looking at the strength to accompany. One of the very fundamental parts of congregations is congregating, is being in relationship with others. And congregations are groups of people that accompany each other throughout life's journeys. And if you think about some of the things that might happen in your local faith community, that would be things related to birth or death, to marriage, or to a major developmental milestones. Looking at bar mitzvahs, looking at confirmation, something in terms of a coming of age. This is one way that congregations accompany each other's. And accompaniment affirms a sense of what we have in common, and how we rely on each other. It's a natural way. It's a natural way of caring, a non-professional way of caring. John McKnight, who's from Northwestern University and has done a lot in community development in the Chicago area, has a book called The Careless Society, in which he talks about the negative impact of professionalizing care. That as we have professionalized care, we have diminished communities' natural ability to care. So when congregations are accompanying each other in that individual care for one-on-one, that is building on the strength. To accompany. Congregations are sociable places where people are formed and transformed, where commitments are made, where they're living together. They're not just groups of individuals making individual choices, but they're social groups that continue over generations. When you think about this in the context of health, when members of congregations intentionally accompany each other throughout life's journeys of health and disease, and if you live for any period of time, you're going to have experience of health and disease. And so when your faith community accompanies you through that, and however that is understood from a perspective of faith, the congregation is using its strength to accompany. Now, some examples that I can think of in that regard would be things like visiting whatever, however that might be handled. Support groups that you might have. Oakdale Covenant Church down near around 95th and Vincennes has a chronic illness support group that is for people who are living with chronic illness, talking about how their faith speaks into that. Beth Emmet Synagogue in Evanston in Evanston had a similar kind of support group. Again, looking at how does the faith tradition speak to accompany people through the experience of illness. There are faith-based weight loss programs. If you're looking on the health side, there's also ways to accompany people in wellness. And I don't want to just focus on illness, because we have different kinds of weight loss programs that are talking from a perspective of faith. We have fitness programs that are trying to use faith language to talk about why we should be fit. So those are some examples of accompaniment in the area of health and illness. Oh, whoops, wrong way. Okay. The second strength is the strength to convene. Congregations have the potential to bring people together around issues of mutual concern. And one of the reasons they can do that, because over time they have developed credible relationships in the community and a certain level of trust, that there's a certain sense of permanence. And people will come when a congregation uses that strength to convene because of those relationships. And when we're looking at public health, it's those relationships that go out into the community beyond the local group that are really significant. Congregations have the potential to bring people together along lines that often might divide, along socioeconomic status, along race, along different professional interests, along self-interest, to bring people together from diverse perspectives. Now, if you're going to address health disparities, you are going to have partnership. You're going to have to bring people together. You're going to have to convene people, because people aren't going to do anything about, for example, childhood obesity if they don't care about it. And they're not going to care about it if they're somehow not brought together to be able to see how is this affecting our community. If you're looking at disaster preparedness, I know one of your groups is focusing on that. People aren't going to engage in trying to address that unless you bring them together, and bring them together to first talk about how this might impact our community. And so this is a particular strength that congregations have, is the ability to bring people together. And it's in the bringing people together where there's a sense that health is not in just the result of individual choices. Health is also a communal responsibility. And it's in that sense of community, when we convene and bring people together, that we can address issues that alone we would not be able to have the same impact. One place, I think, certainly in Chicago, where I have seen that being particularly strong in the African American congregations of convening and trying to bring to consciousness, particular issues that might be a concern. It's certainly something that we see often in terms of our news coverage on different issues. So the strength to convene is an important thing that communities of faith have the potential to do. In a way that a public health department has a strength to convene, but it would be a different group of people, and some of them would be different. So you bring those together, you've got some really powerful convening that you can do. The strength to connect is the third strength that Gunderson talks about. So, for example, a lot of the work that has been done in international community development and missions may come from denominations or healthcare institutions. One of the first things that people did in immigrating to the Chicago area was to develop healthcare institutions. And if you look at the history of our hospitals in Chicago, they are predominantly faith-based. The Jewish community built Mount Sinai. The Methodist community built Wesley Pavilion, which is now part of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The Lutherans built Lutheran General Hospital. The Covenant Church, to which I belong, built Swedish Covenant Hospital to care for the Swedish immigrants. And that is a wonderful, rich tradition of developing, of connecting, and what a denomination can do, or a group of local faith communities can do that an individual group might not be able to do. More recently, we have also in the Chicago area, we have different faith groups that have connected to address issues related to access to health care. So for example, in West Rogers Park, we have the ARC that serves Jewish immigrants and provides, I believe it's free or low-cost health care. We have in the Muslim community the Compassionate Care Network that was formed on the housed out of in the Muslim Community Center on the north side of Chicago, that has physicians who are willing to provide health care for lower cost and for a small fee, which is a wonderful way to help connect people. So in that case, in the ARC, they built a separate place. In Compassionate Care Network, they use that power of connection to connect people who need health care to doctors who are willing to provide health care for a lower cost. We have places like Lawndale Christian Health Center, which was in the Lawndale neighborhood, which is a faith-based, federally qualified healthcare center that is providing care. Again, now that's like the ARC. That is one specific place. These are all come out of the perspective of faith, and there's things that groups of faith communities were able to be part of through using that power to connect. So if you think about the first three strengths that I've spoken about, accompanying, convening, and connecting, all of those strengths all build to what we call social capital. And so if you look at, we talk about capital in terms of economics, in terms of money, and money that we might put in our bank that would develop interest. Well, in our communities, we have social capital, and one of the richest resources we have in our communities are our relationships. And one of the things that faith communities do that can be so powerful is to contribute to developing and nurturing relationships that can be used then to help address the health concerns, the inequities, the injustices that you might see related to health in your particular community. So these are all things that together we're building on a social capital. It's a way almost of, if we use Bonnie's garden metaphor, it's a way of almost preparing the soil. So you know that you can add and enrich your soil it's a way that we are adding to that. So when you think about the strength of connecting, when congregations network with people of faith and secular organizations, again, because you will not be able to address the significant root causes of health, the injustices in the things that promote health and in our healthcare system that contribute to health disparities, without bringing together people of faith and secular organizations. And that's what Dr. Fleming was speaking about in the beginning, about public health and the faith community needing each other in order to do this. So any significant health issue is going to require both. As Gary Gunderson says, a social infrastructure is just a skeleton until it has compassion and discernment. These are what breathe life into the connections, and they depend on the strengths of congregations to nurture them. So you have so congregations, the local faith community becomes the framework, but certainly you all know from your own experience probably that some congregations may have more sense of vitality, than others. And that sense in which they build on those relationships and build on their strengths will affect their capacity to be part of trying to address the health disparities that affect our communities. Now, the fourth strength that Gunderson talks about is the strength to tell stories. Who doesn't like a good story? Our lives are full of stories. Congregations are grounded in stories. If you think about whatever your faith tradition is, there's a story that goes with that. There's a story that may be shared in sacred texts. There's a story that may be shared in music. There is a story that may be shared, in ritual as well too. And so those stories that are told and the stories which are heard, those stories that are repeated, and that's up here on one of these things somewhere, I thought. The stories that you keep on telling have an influence over how you imagine, the moral imagination, if you will, the possibilities to see what might be. So congregations, the local faith community, is grounded in the story of that particular tradition, but then there's the story of that particular local group, how long they've been there, whatever brought them together, whatever may have happened and they're grounded in anticipating what the future might be. You may come from a tradition where the oral tradition is more significant than the written word, and the whole ways in which we tell stories, what we give attention to, are very important. It's important what we tell. It's important what we hear. So when we think about this in the context of health, when the local faith community has the opportunity for individuals or for groups or for communities to share their stories of health and illness, then they're using their strength to tell stories. Again, you're not going to, if you don't hear the stories in the case of looking at health disparities, if you don't hear the stories about issues related to injustice in healthcare, you're not going to care about it. You have to use you can see how these strengths kind of connect together. You have to convene people together in some way to be able to hear about things, and then you have to have an opportunity to hear what the story might be, and how does that story of what people may be experiencing related to injustice and health, how does that speak into your particular religious tradition and their story about how one is to be in the world, how you are connected to however you understand the sacred or the divine, and how you are in relationship to others. So that is what the strength of stories is engaging. Now, another significant strength has to do with the strength to give sanctuary. Now, not all local faith communities have a sanctuary, but the vast majority do. And some faith communities are renting space, or maybe based out of a home. But in this sense, we're talking about the physical space for those local faith communities that have a building. And that physical space is a tremendous strength of the congregation if it's not falling down. Some of you may have had that, sometimes buildings can be a major challenge in terms of trying to keep them up. But assuming we'll consider that the physical space where people are gathering together to worship is a strength. And you need a place in order to gather people together, and that is something that can be shared. That is something that can be shared with others. Thank you very much. I appreciate you attending to my health. Okay. All right. And the way that space is created affects the interaction. If you look at the space we have right now, we're kind of cozy. And that kind of gives you a feeling of being connected. We have been convened here together, and we are kind of connected because we're kind of in a close physical space. If you think about worship space, very often, it will depend on your religious tradition, but very often, a worship space will have a sense of space, of like height and bigness, and somehow that which communicates a sense of connection to the divine in the way that the physical space is interacted. And so that becomes very important. Well, you can use your sanctuary, we're talking about your sanctuary, your whole building, for providing health issues. On the south side of Chicago, at Kenwood United Church of Christ, there is a free clinic, the Norma Jean Sanders Clinic, that is used in that particular physical space. And that's something they can do because they have the space to be able to bring volunteers to provide health care. We have congregations that are providing health education that may be faith-placed, as in using that particular space to provide health education, or might be faith-based, where you're trying to integrate the particular faith perspective. But you can do that because you have space. You can have an exercise program. You can do a walking program if you have that physical space that you can share. A lot of congregations use their space for 12-step groups. And that can be an important, while it doesn't have a specific faith-based perspective, in terms of trying to address the issues of addictions that can disparately affect our communities. That can be a tremendous resource for the community in terms of promoting health. When you look at what we do with those church buildings, making them accessible for people with disabilities who are often disparately affected by health issues, as well as have issues with accessing their opportunities to worship, when a congregation makes their building accessible, that is a way of promoting health. The next strength is the strength to bless. Congregations have the strength to bless each other through their acts, through their words of love, of welcome, of inclusion, of how they accompany each other. We also, and we have to acknowledge this, the opposite of blessing would be condemnation, and we can also exclude people in ways that can be hurtful. But if we're talking, yeah, okay, amen, all right, yeah, you may have had that, okay, you may have had that experience. You know, again, we're talking about optimally functioning congregations, which are made of imperfect people, so we're not all going to be living perfect lives individually or communally. But when we can bless people, when we can welcome and bless people, include people, people of all ethnicities, socioeconomic groups, and physical abilities, when they feel welcomed and blessed by their participation in being part of the local community of faith, then we're having a positive impact on health. The area where I have been most involved in seeing this is in disability ministries, where you look at how do you include families with children with disabilities. And you think, if you've had that experience personally, or you've had that in your own extended family or your local faith community, I mean, it's a tremendous blessing for a family who has a child who uses a wheelchair, who has autism and has difficulty communicating, to how can that family be welcomed and included. That is important not only for the health of that family, but it's important for the health of that local faith community, because there's something very important about being able to care for others in that way and to welcome them and make them feel included. So when you were looking at one of the issues related to health disparities is the whole question of disabilities, and how can the local faith community be part of being inclusive of people who are living with different physical and mental challenges. Kirsten?
Can I just add to that, because I think this is one of the most powerful things, most powerful strengths that faith communities offer. Mm-hmm. Not just, what's the word I want, sort of in name being inclusive,
yeah.
But the actual act of reaching out and accepting people who are on the margins and who society has put outside, people with HIV and AIDS in communities, mm-hmm. People who are addicted. That can be such a radically transforming experience for that individual, mm-hmm. to have a place where they are accepted and can totally turn their life around. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we could tell stories of how that has happened. And not only for the individual, but also for the community. Those kinds of radically inclusive environments and that the kind of presence of a radically blessing, mm-hmm. including kind of a community can be transforming for the whole community as well. It can really be a model and a way of demonstrating this, and this is powerful health activity that congregations
well, and I would refer you in connecting that. I would refer you in connecting that to notice the yellow signs that talk about gifts. The other part of blessing is using people's gifts. And one of the ways that people are blessed is by recognizing that they have something to contribute to the community. So that even somebody who may be totally paralyzed, if you come from a faith tradition where prayer is important and intervention in that regard, that somebody can still be part of the prayer life of the church, even if they can't move their body at all. You know, somebody who has Down syndrome may be able to wash dishes, may be able to give out bulletins for worship if that's something that you do in your local community. So one of the ways that we bless people is by using their gifts. And I once heard John McKnight, who I mentioned, who wrote the Careless Society and who's worked in community development, say that communities are their healthiest when they use the gifts of all individuals. And so when a local faith community uses the strength to bless, that sense of inclusion, which for those people who might seem as though they are in the center, so might include, if the people on the fringes are welcomed, then what if something happens to me that I become on the fringe? You know, what if I become disabled? What if I lose my job? If I am part of a local faith community that is radically inclusive and is blessing people and welcoming them and using their gifts, then if something major changes in my situation, and that could happen to any of us, then how much? we have a testimony there. Okay. So what does that say? I have to say that is something that my local pastor does. I feel does particularly well in the way that people are welcomed during worship, and the way that he speaks in a way that feels inclusive, and to me makes it feel as though whatever might happen, how I might be doing okay right now, but who knows what could happen to me. And to know that I would still be part of this community, you know, no matter what might happen. Okay, now the next strength is closely related, as they all are. Wait a minute, we already did that. Whoops, going wrong. Bless. Okay, the strength to pray. And looking at what whether you pray individually or communally or corporately, prayer is a distinguishing characteristic of local faith communities, and it's something that is what we do to evoke and to celebrate the presence of the holy, however that is understood in your faith tradition in people's lives. It can be a way of sharing concerns or burdens and drawing on the resources of faith. Some religious traditions use ritual prayers that are prayers that may have been repeated over centuries and hundreds and thousands. I mean, years and years and years of praying the same prayer, and that connects you to that story of your religious tradition. Other religious traditions may use spontaneous prayer, where you are speaking as you may feel inspired. And so, but whatever the tradition is, that sense of how we celebrate and communicate and experience the presence of the holy in our lives is significant. The whole concept of pilgrimage may be significant in terms of prayer life and what local congregations are trying to do. And so in some traditions, prayer may be connected to, I know Kirsten spoke about spirit power last time. It could be an important part of the discernment that prayer might be. For some local faith communities, prayer and using that strength would be an important part of discernment in terms of looking at faith and public health partnerships and what they might feel I would use the language from my perspective of talking about being called, and what a local faith community might feel called to do because of their connection to spirit. Others might use a different language to talk about that. But however the local faith community is connecting to their sense of the divine, that the strength to pray can be a powerful one, and it's a unique thing to the community of faith. Now, the last strength that Gunderson talks about is, oops, I'm wrong. I've got the wrong direction. Okay, the strength to endure. Well, is anybody here from a local faith community that has been together for less than 10 years? Okay, we've got, all right, okay. Now, there are, a new faith community is going to have some sense of endurance from whatever larger tradition you might be part of. I mean, there's a sense in which the history of your religious tradition, is part of that sense of endurance. But generally, there is the expectation that local faith communities endure. They stay around. If you look at neighborhoods that change, people may still be coming back to their local church, synagogue, depending on your religious tradition and any parameters in terms of where you worship. But that connection, you look at some of our oldest buildings in Chicago are churches, synagogues. I don't know if mosques would be amongst our oldest buildings in the Chicago area, because that might be in more recent years, but certainly in other years.
Certainly worldwide.
Worldwide you would. Worldwide you would. But if you're looking at Chicago specifically, you would see the churches and synagogues being some of the oldest buildings that you would find in this area. And that sense that congregations endure, the local faith community that is tied to a place, is something that can be used as an asset in engaging the community. It has that sense of history. There's an expectation that they're going to be around, and a hope of moving into the future. So, those are our 8 congregations. If we could get our yes, that, Shirley. Whatever we call those things. If we could put those things up while Shirley's helping and Mamie are getting these up. Can you think of any strengths of local faith, of the local faith communities that you might add in addition? And I'm talking in general. I'm not talking about your specific strengths of your local faith community. Can you think of any ones that you would add if you were Nancy?
To advocate and perhaps to empower, although that's sort of inclusive of some of your other categories.
Okay, I don't know if you heard Venuncia. She said to advocate and to empower. There is an implication that some of these things, it's kind of the next step. If you accompany, connect, and convene, chances are that might very well lead to action or advocacy. But you're right. That sense, one of the things that faith communities that I know that faith communities will speak to has to do with our relationship with the other, with those who may be in need, however that's understood. And so advocacy would be important. Yes?
The strength to galvanize resources towards particular or to meet a particular need, social justice, community. If those resources are people or their money or their just the ability to tap into that.
Which is kind of related to advocacy. Yeah, I think that sense to go beyond and to really pull something together and to move ahead. Any other strengths that you would want to add?
I guess kind of going along with the strength to endure. I mean, you're talking about here, the physical building itself.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about trying to make something out of nothing, I think that churches, faith-based organizations are used to doing powerful things without a lot of resources.
That is did you all hear that? That local faith communities, are used to doing a lot with a little bit of money. And there's some stories in Christian tradition that that clearly would speak to that.
Sure.
And Jewish tradition too, but creativity, a strength of creativity.
Like the gentleman who sat up on the building.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Just sitting on the building.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There certainly are some expectations, whether or not you exactly would use that stewardship, how you share resources. I know that you would speak to that in Christian, Jewish, and Muslim tradition. I don't know about other religious traditions. Those would be the ones that I know would speak to that for sure. Yeah.
I was thinking the strength to go against popular culture at any epoch in time. That's what makes them stand out.
Uh-huh.
They are.
The strengths that go, and you think about that, and and certainly you think about that. I'm thinking about in the Orthodox Jewish community of being of going against some of the things they've done to go against against the church. There's a lot of radical, faith communities where you're living in community and sharing resources, that are countercultural. I think the Reba Place Fellowship in Evanston, that's a Mennonite community. I'm sorry, what?
Friendly Towers.
Friendly Towers, Yakuza. Are you from Yakuza?
I have good friends there
Oh.
for years and years.
Oh yeah, I know a lot of people there. Okay, one other.
The strength to multiply.
Ooh, strength to multiply. Now that is interesting. If you're in a tradition where that is intentional about trying to gather more in, and not all religious traditions are, but in those that are intentional about bringing more in, that you can draw more folks in. And very often that engagement with the community may be something that will draw people in. So that if you see that your local faith community is involved in real issues in your community about the health, then you're going to want to be part of that and say, I want to be part of a group of people that cares about the fact that the food desert in our community where we can't get enough fresh fruits or vegetables, or that cares about the older people that are poor and are having trouble paying for their medicine, or that cares about the immigrants who are having trouble finding jobs and finding their place. Okay, now I've got to keep track of my time here. Okay. Oh, I'm okay? All right, okay. I've got 10 minutes. Okay, so here's what I want to do in the last 10 minutes. And I want to, before we do our disassembling thing, I just want to suggest one other thing, because now we're going to get up and be physically active. I will share, and this will be up here if anybody is interested. One brief commercial, and Tugger, we have a certificate in faith and health at North Park. If you're interested in academic courses related to faith and health, there are some things there for your interest. The other thing that I would suggest, one other additional strength that I think it has to do in the sacred text, that I think that there's tremendous assets in whatever in the Bible, in the Quran, in whatever in the sacred texts that really speak to why local communities of faith should be involved in caring about the other and being involved in issues that relate to health. Now, what I want you to do now, having talked about these different strengths, I want you to go up here, and we've got all 8 strengths, and here's one over here that says other. I want you to take your stickies and I want you to put them with the one that you said was about your overall religious tradition, and the ones that you have for your individual community. I want you to put them up here and see what we get. Okay?